So, are we all ready to admit that Kenneth Mitchell is the new Jeffrey Combs? Hello interwebs and welcome to my review of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 12, The Good of the People, the penultimate episode of Season 3. I love it that I can't say basic words like penultimate. Anyways, yes, this is the penultimate episode of Season 3. As always, I'm going to be giving my spoiler-free review up front, and then we are going full on into spoiler territory. So, if you haven't seen the episode yet, we're all safe here. It's all good. You're good. You're good. Just like Ren, giving the good old thumbs up. So what did I think of it? Well, I adored this episode. This episode was really kind of everything that I love about Star Trek and kind of like old Star Trek and new Star Trek combined in terms of what I love about them. This was an action movie plot. There was tons of fighting, gunning, there's some subterfuge, there was some good fight sequences, things like that. It was just a lot of fun, and honestly, it felt like grandiose in the scale of like a finale. This is probably like kind of a pseudo part one leading into the finale next week. Didn't say part one in the title, but it really kind of felt that way. But it had all that like action movie weight of you would expect from a finale of Star Trek. But not only that, it wasn't just the big grandiose, let's, shoot things and have all that actiony stuff going on here. There's actually some really nuanced and ethical discussions, political discussions surrounding power and who gets to be in power and the erosion of power and the erosion of idealism in the face of practicality and how that the Federation and Starfleet must confront that. All like some really, really wonderful political nuanced discussions that I think really feel germane to what we're discussing today without actually being like beat you on the head, like saying like, make the Empire strong again sort of thing. Not that I necessarily hate when Star Trek gets that didactic. I know some people have a problem with it. But here I thought it was like speaking to real issues of politics today and even capitalism and the sort of devil's bargains that we make in doing so. But really standing up for what Star Trek has always felt like it stood up for. And this is all portrayed perfectly by Admiral Vance. The actor who plays Admiral Vance, who I apologize to him, I don't have it in front of me and I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but Admiral Vance does a really, really great job this entire episode. This was really his time to shine, so much so that I'm like, oh, is this the episode he's gonna die in? Anytime like a side character in Discovery at this point like gets attention, I'm always like, oh no! Is this their death episode or where they leave the show? We've seen that a couple times already on the show, most notably with Arium earlier on in season 2. Without spoiling where that goes for him, this is really his time to shine, and I think he does a really wonderful job. And finally alleviates that thing in my head of like, I've always felt this season of like Starfleet may be bad, but Admiral Vance he is my sweetheart now. I adore Admiral Vance and I adore his, willing to stand up for Star Trek morality. Again, I'll talk more specifically about all of that later on, but truly wonderful job by the Admiral Vance actor throughout this episode. There's also some really wonderful guest stars in here, some surprisingly deeply emotional moments, especially for Stamets. Anthony Rapp doing a really good job. He does play it heightened at a few points, but I think he does show like a depth of range of emotion throughout this entire episode. So a true standout episode for Anthony Rapp as well. And yeah, the entire cast and crew just do a really, really good job in this sort of action movie but heavy political plot. And I honestly thought it was truly wonderful. Mary Wiseman also gets a great few moments. Nora Averbach-Katz as Rin also gets a few really good moments. Osira. Last episode was the episode where I said like, oh yeah, Osira is kind of a one-note villain. And I thought that, I was liking that she was being a little bit more scenery chewing and got to like play up the role. But I still felt that she was very one-note last episode. And this evolution of her character continues to make her a much more nuanced and intriguing character. The journey that I have gone on with the Osira character has been one of the most fascinating in her few appearances this season. I've gone from being like, ugh, she's boring and dull to, you're one of the more intriguing villains this season, and they've done it in 3 episodes. So credit to the writers there. All around, this episode has me deeply excited and intrigued for the finale and wondering where they're going to go with it even after that into season 4. But really just all around, just really, really great. There was no like, oh my God, amazing moment like the Guardian of Forever a few episodes, but taking on just a solid, strong episode of Star Trek, I could not ask for more. But that's everything that I have for my spoiler-free review. Let's go into spoilers because I honestly want to just talk about it. Like I said, there was no like, oh my god, amazing moment, except for a couple moments here and there, but there was no like, oh my gosh, that was so crazy, but just solid all around. So let's start off with the opening sequence. I love this sort of like the Discovery's trying to get into into Starfleet headquarters, this sort of like weird bubble that they have, and Osiris Ships is pretending to attack Discovery as Discovery sort of gets in. It reminded me a lot of the season finale of The Mandalorian just a few weeks ago. I was just thinking like, oh, they're Boba Fetting it, where Boba Fett pretended to attack the Mandalorian ship in order for them to get to the Empire ship. Very much felt like what Osiris was doing here. It's weird that those things sort of surreptitiously, can't say words today, happen at the same time in storytelling in these two big sci-fi franchises. I mean, obviously there's going to be a lot of overlap, and obviously they probably didn't know the other was doing it just based on when they filmed stuff. But I just found it kind of funny that the same sort of tactic was used in the near finales of both shows. So that was kind of fun. But I like that Admiral Vance was playing it incredibly intelligently. Like, you know, I was worried. It's like, oh yeah, let him in, just get him in. I'm going to trust him. But Vance just consistently shows that he's a smart admiral and he knows how to handle a situation. He didn't entirely trust Discovery. He's like, something's off here. What's going on? And was waiting to hear a signal to let them in. But he eventually feels forced to. He's like, well, I'll err on the side of trying to save the ship. But I like that it wasn't just an automatic like, oh yeah, save Discovery. I thought that was deeply intelligent on his part. The only knock against the opening that I really could say is that Book and Burnham sort of crashing into the Discovery felt a bit forced. I would have like had them fire on the ship just to at least show Vance that they were that something was up and something was wrong. Why would Book's ship be firing on Discovery? So it was a bit of a force, like get them onto the ship sort of thing. But I thought that was the only forced thing. I did like the explanation of the transwarp hub from last episode that I kind of complained about in my last review, sort of being shown and showing why it's so dangerous. So I at least appreciated that element of it to at least showcase why that was so dangerous. But I feel like if that was something so useful, yes, it's dangerous, but like, feel like more people would be navigating beyond just the couriers and Osira. So kind of loses a little bit of the strength of the burn for having that even be a conceit here and able to get them around so quickly. So a little bit of a ding there at the top on that front, but at least it likes showing that it has a lot of weight to it and is kind of dangerous to use. We also get a moment on the bridge where they say, oh, something's up. There's some like entertainment playing. Obviously, they're building up Calypso and the sphere data becoming sentient that we saw earlier on in the season. And like I said, in Calypso. So I like that little seeding of that moment here at the top of the episode. That was smartly done. And I also like the reminder of the dots, the little like robot-y things throughout the episode as well, to sort of remind us that those are a thing as well. And I'm glad that those are finally paying off. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But then we get the scene with Osira and Kenneth Mitchell, by the way. Oh my gosh, Kenneth Mitchell getting to be in a wheelchair on the show, doing his best like evil scientist Davros impression. I love he's not as evil as Davros, as we'll get into, but you know, Kenneth Mitchell can definitely play Davros. For those of you who don't know, Kenneth Mitchell has played a lot of different disparate characters throughout this modern era of Star Trek, a few Klingons in Discovery, as well as appearing in Lower Decks. He might have appeared in Picard as well, I don't know off the top of my head, but Kenneth Mitchell was unfortunately diagnosed with ALS a little while ago, maybe a year or so ago, so there was a bit of a sadness to the fact that like he might not be able to be involved in Star Trek anymore just because of his health reasons. But I'm glad that Kenneth Mitchell got to appear here as the sort of scientist working under Osira. It was really nice to see him, and nice to see him out of makeup. I thought he did an absolutely fantastic job as the scientist. And I like his first scene with Osira here, really humanizing Osira. As I said, I thought Osira was kind of like a one-note villain at top, but this just kind of blown her out is like she has a relationship with this guy. She's built him up. She's like been kind to him and knows him and feels for him, and he obviously feels for her. And I don't get the hint that like it was ever just her playing him. Like she feels genuinely about him. Like it'd be very easy to have her be like, wahaha, like clearly she's manipulating him and using his love for her to manipulate him into doing what she wants. And I'm sure there's an element of that, but it truly feels sincere between Kenneth Mitchell and Osira. So I really liked that quite a bit, and I thought that was wonderfully played between the two of them. I'm going to kind of split up the action a little bit here because we kind of go into separate different storylines throughout this. So the first one that I'm going to focus on, which is the one that I really love, which is the Osari Vance plot. All of you know that I adore politics in my Star Trek. I love when Star Trek gets very political. Not when I say like, oh, let's like do like, you know, overt politics about today and be very didactic. I don't mind that either. But I love like learning about the politics of the Federation and the Star Trek world. That's just stuff that I really love. It's why I love shows like The Expanse and Game of Thrones. I love the politicking. And so this whole stuff with Vance and Osari just worked brilliantly for me. I loved their first meeting where she comes in and Vance basically says like, we can shoot your people if they do anything wrong, sort of setting the tone. But then Osari coming in and they're doing their discussion. The whole talk about the lie detector thing was, I thought, very, very funny, and calling him Eli was truly wonderful, and having him there and sort of having him be sort of like an offbeat, sort of like can tell that she's telling the truth and we can trust her. Again, building out this idea that Osari is actually not as morally bwahaha evil as we've thought her to be up until this point, because they've portrayed her that way. And so I like that this using of this like lie detector thing kind of shows that, yeah, she is telling the truth, and she's not just straight up and up like bwahaha villain when she offers to Vance to say join forces with the Federation. I truly adore this twist because, and she even explicitly says stuff about like capitalism and, you know, you need to look at the realistic situation here. I love this idea. The Federation has always been about ideals, has always been about being better. Like, you know, Federation was a utopia. As we've seen throughout all of Star Trek, the Federation is a utopia. And yes, it may have problems here and there. And yes, they may fail to live up to those ideals, but we live in a post-scarcity society where anything can happen. Like the bounds of imagination are not limited by resources. But now in this post-burn society, that is not the case. And so it asks this question that Discovery really has asked every single season of like, how do we hold onto our ideals in the darkest of times? And Discovery's done that mostly on a personal level, but here it's asking it on a political level of, is the Federation willing to sacrifice its ideals of hope in order to side with the Emerald Chain, which, yeah, maybe not the most evil thing in the world. Like, as Osari said, she's outlawed slavery, she's done all these things, but it's definitely not all completely on the up and up. It has the facade of being moral and ethical, but it is not necessarily a good thing. And so it would be selling a little bit of your soul, the sort of bargain with the devil. And the devil doesn't always look like the devil. And I like that sort of building out of the humanizing of the Emerald Chain, that, again, they're not just bwahaha evil, but they're nuanced and layered. And there's a little bit more depth to them than they seem. And that makes it so easy to allow yourself to say, okay, I'll let this happen. Because look, they're not that bad. And it's just that slow erosion over time of, if you let her into the Federation, you would have that slow creep of losing your ethics and your moral center just over time. And I like that it's believable. It feels entirely believable that this would be the case. That if you're just looking pragmatically at the situation the Federation is in, yeah, they kind of need to expand their reach if they want to survive. They need to have some sort of stronger mercantile chain than they currently have in order to survive. And so I really adore that sort of building out of like this is a very real ethical dilemma. And we see it play out, as I talk about on the personal scale, over with Stamets and Kenneth Mitchell. I adored the scene between Stamets and Kenneth Mitchell where I keep calling him Kenneth Mitchell because unfortunately I forgot the character's name and I didn't write it down, unfortunately. So apologies to the character. But I love the scene where Kenneth Mitchell's trying to explain to Stamets like, hey, I believe in her. She took me in. She accepted me. She helped me. And Stamets understanding that and reacting to that, and also like humanizing himself to Kenneth Mitchell as well, saying like, I have a kid, I have family, building out that sort of element of like humanizing yourself to your captor. But Stamets saying like, look, I get that she cared for you, but she's also done horrible things too. And just because she has helped you, just because you have the privilege of being the recipient of her eye, does not allow you to ignore all the other people that she is hurting. And so there's this wonderful discussion of privilege and being able to ignore people because of your privilege throughout this whole episode, because of how Osari masterfully is able to portray being a good, caring leader to the people who need to see that, who can stand up for her, but doing the surreptitiously bad things in the background. And Stamets brings that up. It's like, I've seen her use pesticides and force people to do horrible things for her own ends. So it's just a wonderfully nuanced conversation here throughout both the macro level and the micro level about Osari. And was not expecting that at all with her character. And I thought it was really, really wonderful. And I loved going back to the Vance conversation. Also, I like the acknowledgement that the Federation president is a person that exists that we just didn't want to cast this season. But I like the acknowledgement that there is a separation between the Federation and Starfleet. I do find that the conflation of the two is a bit of a problem this season on Star Trek Discovery. That we sort of said, yeah, Starfleet, Federation, they're basically the same thing, right? So I like that there's at least a tacit acknowledgement of the separation there between military and, civilian government, but still an issue, to be sure, to be very honest with you, but still intriguing, and I at least like that. But anyways, going back to this, I like that the whole reason that the bargain falls apart, that it almost goes through, but Vance himself never lets go of his morals. He's like, all right, I can look at this pragmatically, but the Federation is standing up for his ideals, and the only reason that the deal falls through is because of Osira saying like, oh, I don't want to be held accountable for my actions. And he's like, no, you need to be held accountable. We need to learn from the past in order to go forward. Again, going back to that trauma theme that's been weaved throughout this whole season of like, we need to deal with our traumas, our past, to reconcile them in order to move forward. And Osira is not willing to take personal responsibility, nor is she willing to look at the past. So I adored that. I also liked her mention about the abstraction of the lie detector, like the fact that the lie detector is just sort of an algorithmic face instead of someone real. Sort of like this idea is like, yeah, we can have the ideal of the Federation, but if you're not going to make it anything real, then what does it matter? It doesn't do anything for you. And also the food replication thing, and Vance being like, yeah, this may be shit, but I'd rather have this. I'd rather have something real like this instead of what you offer. And so there's just some subtle writing here, like using symbolism and metaphor in order to get at the heart of what they're talking about here. So beautifully written, beautifully done. Both actors play it really wonderfully, and I like it. Feels realistic that the only reason it falls apart is because Osira can't get over herself and isn't willing to hold herself accountable in the face of the larger good, and isn't willing to do that work, and Vance holding firm to that. So finally, I truly believe that Vance is on the up and up. I've had this whole thing with like, maybe Starfleet isn't fully trustworthy. After this scene, I'm like, no, Vance, I stan Vance. I'm a stan Vance stan. Yeah, whatever, that. I will say all the stuff with Tilly and the crew was a lot of fun as well. Like the tapping scene was very funny, very well done. I like that it was sort of a twist on this play, because when I watched, I'm like, okay, come on, the tapping thing's a bit obvious. No one's catching that. That seems really dumb. And they put a clever twist on it, like, subverting expectations of ourselves and the captors. I thought that was a really fun little scene and a good moment between all of them. I like also the actor from episode 2, again, the villain from that episode, I forget his name, the Western dude from Deadwood, coming into this and sort of getting at Tilly's insecurities. I liked his callback and his, he still wasn't much of a character. He was the more one-note villain than Osira was throughout this episode, but he functioned well, and it was a nice little callback to bring him in and have that little moment with Tilly and sort of showing her loss of belief in herself, and even being brought up to Vance by Osira later on. Osira using that to dig for information in that scene as well to figure out where Tilly is. So great scene there between the crew and Tilly, and Book saying to Tilly after they escape Tilly, Book says to Tilly, I want you to save Burnham, so I'm willing to sacrifice my own life to get there to save Burnham, sort of showing that Book only wants to save Burnham. That's his main concern throughout this, not some larger good. As we see later on when he is confronted by Osira, and he gives up the dilithium planet in order to save not only Burnham, but Rin's life as well. I will say, Rin dying shocked the crap out of me, by the way, just jumping there. I know I'm kind of jumping around, but this episode's so multifaceted and layered that I kind of am jumping all around. As someone who's met Noah Averbach-Katch, who I did an interview with, who is a wonderful soul, I was so upset. I mean, I understand what it's doing for the story. I like that it sort of gives that impetus to Kenneth Mitchell's character to be like, oh, I see that Osira is an evil person, so I appreciate it, but I was like, no, Rin, why? No, my blue friend. I'm sorry to see you go, but you were great. Yeah, so it's really shocking and sad to see Rin go. But I appreciated what it did for Kenneth Mitchell's storyline. The last little bit that I have to touch upon is Burnham's storyline. I mean, most of it was just sort of like action beats. I thought it was all fine and, good for what it was. I liked the moment where she calls her mom. That felt like a good beat where she's talking about her mom and her dad. I thought that was good. The one bit where they get sucked out into space, and so she's fighting that girl and they get sucked out into space, the fire suppression system, was fine. I thought it was relatively clever, but it did bother me. I'm like, you're telling me the Discovery sensors wouldn't detect that someone's in the Jeffries tube and wouldn't vent it out into space even if there was a fire? That felt to me a little bit forced. I feel like Discovery would have something to say, oh, there's a life sign there. maybe don't vent that into space. Or maybe Burnham turned it off is the only thing I could really think of. But the rest of it was all fairly fine until the moments where she meets with Stamets. And I like Stamets getting rescued and being like, no, I need to go back. I need to save Culper. And then he learns Adira's there and like, Adira is my family. This is my family. Everything I have is in that nebula. Great job by Anthony Rapp there portraying that and showing like, I want to go back. We need to save them. Showing the stakes of that there. I thought that was a really emotional moment for him. And then even more emotional when Burnham sort of convolutedly puts him in a force field and blows the ship to get him off the ship. I feel like she could have just teleported him for whatever reason. So it was a very complicated method of getting him off the ship, and also like the bulkhead that have windows that don't explode that we saw with Captain Pike and Cornwell at the end of season 2. What is with those bulkheads that do not explode in the face of anything? I thought it just reminded me of that. But anyways, while the way that this sort of getting Stamets off the ship was a bit convoluted and weird, I did at least appreciate the emotional beat of it. Stamets just like emotionally destroying Burnham. Like I was like, wow, Stamets, that is cruel. Like we came here for the future for you. It was harsh, but I could also understand how desperate he was. He's lost Culber before. He's gone through that trauma before. And you could see like how hard it would be for him to go through it all again after he finally got him back. I could understand it. Like, it was hard to watch. It was cruel, but I 100% understand. I'm not condoning it, but I understand where Stamets is coming from. Is like, he does not want to go through that trauma again of losing everything that he has. So wonderfully portrayed by Anthony Rapp. It was really hard to watch, to be very honest with you. It was one of the hardest scenes to watch this entire episode, with him just digging into Burnham. Wonderfully portrayed, even though the way of getting him off the ship was deeply convoluted. But I at least loved that scene. And then the final scene to really of note to mention was the Dot Sevens showing up, or whatever they're called now, Yakko, Wacko, and Dot, I guess I'll call them, showing up with the sphere data inside of them to help out Tilly and the crew as they make their attempt to beat down Osira. Yeah, I thought that was a good little cliffhanger to leave this on with, now we can't go save Saru and Adira, so what's going to happen with them, and Culber as well, and then how are we going to get off the ship with these, with the sphere data, and maybe how is that going to lead into Calypso eventually. All really intriguing questions, has a good setup for the finale. I'm very excited. Yeah, like I said, this episode didn't have necessarily anything besides maybe Noah's death. Calling him Noah because I got to interview him. I'm sorry, I don't mean to like, oh yeah, I got to interview Noah, look at me. That's what I think of him as now. I don't see Rin, I'm like, oh yeah, it's Noah. So apologies, I don't mean to sound like a smug jerk there. But besides that moment, that was the one sort of major shocking moment, the sphere data, everything like that. So nothing like stood out as like, oh my god, that was so crazy. But this was just a very solid episode that I deeply enjoyed every moment of. And I just loved every single beat that they went through. I loved Kenneth Mitchell, loved the Admiral Vance actor. I loved, Anthony Rapp, all got stuff to do. Mary Wiseman, all great stuff. I love politics in my Star Trek. How about you? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear all of that. I hope that all of you had a wonderful Christmas if you celebrated it, and I hope that you're all about to have a very wonderful New Year as well as we go into the 2021, which will hopefully be better than 2020. Couldn't be much worse, to be very honest with you. So I'm very excited for that. Don't forget to subscribe. I also have a Patreon if you want to support me. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you to all of my patrons this month, but especially Amanda Ronye Idanya, Catherine Lambeth, Ashley Ellen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Bergmoss, Ashlyn Solstice, Michael D., Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Ulysses the Pagan, Randy Thompson, Munir Amlani, Chamomile T., Stephen Schuhart, Wellington Marcus, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Roar, Christina Dalliance, Dominic Noble, John Steele, Michael Beam. She sells seashells by the seashore of Bajor. William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, The Sir Spence, BBD, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Jason Knott, Andrew Jorgensen, Chris Brown, Jasmine, Maeve, Bree Beecher, Subraxis, Skylar Gray, Nathan Steele, Jane Packard and Chloe Dollar, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Gretchen Badger, Geek Filter, Bush, Celestial Dawn, Din, Sarah Bastam, Polly Mina, Jacob Tovar, Piston Twisted Garage, Lily, Jean Mithun, Andrew Lamori, Lysa, Zone 1 Librarian, Michael Hardy, Corey Honkanen, and KT Dunn. Thank you so much to all of you. You're quite literally making my dreams come true, so I cannot tell you how thankful I am.